Okay, this is the things they carried, the chapter entitled How to Tell a True War Story. In this chapter, plot-wise, we have O'Brien relating the story about Kurt Lemon's death, Mitchell Sanders' version of a story he heard about Green Berets being stationed in the jungle and being bewitched by mysterious sounds like this. Or like this. And as well as that story, we have a gut-wrenching story of animal cruelty, which you can choose not to believe is true. I know I'm choosing not to believe that's true. And he delivers his philosophy on telling a true story, a true war story. So a narration pretty much consistent with the syntax he's used throughout, which gives it almost a conversational tone and a believability. We have like the short, choppy sentences followed by the longer ones, just like a lot of people tell stories like, this is true. I had a buddy in Vietnam. His name was Bob Kiley, but everybody called him Rat. He tells a few stories to make a point, how her brother would always volunteer for stuff nobody else would volunteer for in a million years. Dangerous stuff, like doing recon or going out on these really badass night patrols. Those kinds of sentences lend to the conversational tone and give you a sense of being there, hearing the story. There's also, the tone is difficult to classify. It's very serious. It's very, I want to say deep, if I can't find a better word than that. He kind of tries to be didactic without being too heavy. And he says, a true war story is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue. It does not suggest models of proper human behavior nor restrain men from doing things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. At the end of the story, if you feel you've been uplifted or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude whatsoever. There is no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil. I think he is telling us pretty clearly how he feels about the horrors of war right there, and also how he feels about people who glorify, sentimentalize war. I think he's setting himself apart from those people in that bit right there, in the tone at least. You got to ask yourself, does O'Brien tell a true war story by his own guidelines? And one of the things he says is, does it convince you in your stomach of its truth? And he talks about this embarrassment thing, which has been a theme throughout. You can tell a true war story if it embarrasses you. If you don't care for obscenity, you don't care for the truth. If you don't care for the truth, watch how you vote. That's a pretty interesting caution that he puts in there about not just the obscenity thing, but the voting and the real consequences of voting for the people who do, in fact, run the wars and start the wars. Okay, something that he brings up that's interesting and probably the biggest thing to take away from the chapter is this concept that a lot of people struggle with. And he's talking about, a philosophical actual truth versus something we'll call a story truth. So actual truth is things that happened, right? Facts that can't be disputed. The story truth is something that expresses a larger truth for more situations than its own context. Something that may or may not have happened exactly the way it was told, but expresses a bigger reality. And I know that's kind of difficult to agree with, difficult to accept on face value, but he's talking about the kinds of things that transcend one person's experience but tell a larger truth for all of humanity and all of the situations. So I think back to that Emerson and Thoreau story that I told you guys was apocryphal or not true, about how Emerson went to visit Thoreau in jail, and Emerson says to him, "What are you doing in there?" And Thoreau replies, "What are you doing out there?" And everybody knows that didn't happen, but it kind of expresses a truth about the difference between the two men's approaches and the difference between the way the two men live their lives. So it's not true on a actual truth level, but on a story truth level, it expresses some truth. You can kind of take it or leave it. It's up to you. But that's what O'Brien is really trying to do here. He's trying to tell stories that have story truth and echo with more people's experiences than just his own. Probably trying to encompass experiences that happen to a lot of Vietnam vets, not just his own experience. So I'm going to put a YouTube video with actually Tim O'Brien in after this video following my remarks. Thanks.
I ran into a kid in Seattle, 26-year-old, at a book signing, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye, standing in the corner, and was kind of frightened by him. Not in physically, but I mean, oh God, I hope it's not a manuscript he's got to give me, and that, which is hell, of course. And finally the reading ended, and he hung around, and I could feel him out of the corner of my eye approach me, and he had me sign his book, and I did. He began to leave, and then he turned around and he said, "I think you knew my father." And as soon as he said those words, I knew who the kid was. I saw it in his face. You could see his dad in that kid's face. It was my platoon leader in Vietnam. And he told me over the course of the next, 20 minutes or half hour, that the kid had been searching for his father ever since. His father had committed suicide soon after Vietnam, and had looked for his dad in very brave, cool ways. He had joined the army just to see what his father had gone through. He'd become a Green Beret to see what his dad had been, and a ranger, all this tough snake eating, stuff. And he had picked up my first book, and his father figures in the book, not always in the most laudatory ways. In fact, not in laudatory ways. Well, that encounter, I mean, makes me want to cry. If I weren't on camera, I'd be a little tears in my eyes now, because it's an example of why I began writing in the first place. I wanted to touch people in a way that stories can touch them. And I had helped in a very modest way for this fellow to fill in a gap of who this man had been who had committed suicide before they even knew his father. His father had killed himself when he was I think he was like 6 months old or 8 months, very young. Encounters like that remind me of why I began. It's easy to forget why you become a writer. And letters I'll get from the girlfriends of people in Iraq or Afghanistan, or the children, which all say the same thing. Basically, I don't know my dad, and he won't talk about it, or my mom in some cases, but largely men. And I read your book, and now I know at least something of what he's carrying around with him, and what he won't talk about, and sometimes the book will be shared with the veteran, and conversation will ensue, and that is way beyond anything I intended in the writing of the book. I didn't intend to bring people together or start them talking, but it shows you the power of literature. It really touches individual people, real lives, and the real world, and contributes to their lives. It does something to their lives. That's what I dreamed of when I began writing. I dreamed of touching some 15-year-old kid in Dubuque, or some grieving mother in Harlem. Literature makes you feel, if it's any good, it can make you feel a little less alone in the world. And someone else has gone through this, and it gives you some late night company with your memories and your sorrow. Literature does touch people. It's not just to be read in English classes.